Welcome back inside the Now Morning Show. This morning we continue the conversation about work ethic and accountability. Let me welcome back to the show Mr. Richard Solomon, Managing Director and Principal Consultant at Development Consulting Centre Ltd. Good morning to you, sir.
Thanks a lot. Good morning, Rawkus. Good to be here again. I was just reflecting that this is a long-standing thing with TTT. I remember being here maybe 2008. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that long ago. Yeah.
And having the same conversation?
Different conversations, but so many of our problems in Trinidad and Tobago are challenges, if we put them that way, are long-standing. Let's just say.
And you know, that's one of the things we also were discussing off air, right? Is some of the challenges that we face can go on or feel as though we've been having the same conversation forever. Yeah. We've been having the same conversation about how do we improve work ethic? How do we change the culture of the people? I mean, can you even change the culture of a people?
So, what is culture? Culture is values and accountability, values and behaviors. So the question is, can you change people's behavior? Well, we can. Humans change their behavior all the time. The question becomes, how do we change the behavior of a mass of people?
Exactly.
That is where the challenge is, and it's very possible. But we first have to understand what is the problem we're dealing with. It's not enough to say, you know, major challenges for doing business are poor bureaucracy, poor work ethic, and so on. You have to understand what has created that, what has given rise to where we are.
Tell us.
Well, I don't think we've done any substantial and extensive research and studies to properly understand and explain that. And I think that's where we need to begin.
Okay.
We need to begin with understanding not just what is the problem, but why did it occur? I mean, we could point to our colonial past, we could point to indentureship and slavery, we could point to oil being discovered very early, and how we spent that money. We could point to the involvement of labor and how labor behaves in this country, and I point that out because in 141 countries, labor and employer relations are worst in Trinidad and Tobago out of 141 countries.
Wow.
We have a really bad relationship. And the involvement of labor with politics. You know, all of those things came in and I think influenced, but no one has really done a piece of research, a body of research that really explains how these various variables, or forces, better word, impacted and has created where we are today. So that's the first thing.
But I feel as though we've seen it. We've seen lots. I mean, it may not have been extensive research in the sense of an academic doing it necessarily. Yeah. But we see it reflected in art all the time. We see those topics being explored. We see people exploring, you know, the different ways that we do it, from the Walcuts of society to the Naipals of society, to even the musicians of society. Yeah. We've seen it being reflected back at us all the time.
Yeah.
So we know that we have these challenges that we've been facing. But in terms of, so all right, if we say, all right, we have, let's say we magically get the academic version of the research that we can say, all right, back in this year, we spent this amount of money and we saw this result. I mean, I'm assuming that's the kind of extensive data you're talking about,
we need
right?
That kind of data,
if we get that kind of data, how does that help us to change the masses still?
But then that tells us where to reverse engineer to.
Okay.
I mean, we had a song called We Jammin' Still, which was, in my opinion, one of the best descriptions I have heard of this nation.
Hence it went Road March.
Right? And yes, that is true, but then we need the specifics. What is this academia about? It's really to explain the world around us and help us to live better in it. So we need the specifics so that we could go back and begin to re-engineer. What do we need to re-engineer? We could guess. We probably need to go back to the schools, to the communities. Yeah, we need to go back how we plan for what career people get into. You know, we spent money and get billions and billions and billions of dollars. Should we just have spent money, or should we have said, well, we want to develop these areas and therefore we point monies in those directions? Should there have been a behavioral component that we should have measured as well? Should that be part of our means test, for example?
I mean, I feel like having conversations about should have and would have, is that relevant? Is that effective?
Right, so that is what a piece of research will tell us.
Right.
It will tell us, okay, given where we are, these are the forces that have created the outcomes that we have, and therefore, here's what we need to do. That's what research is about. It's, you know, and I very often decry a lot of researchers because research is buried all over the place. We're not sufficiently trying to explain our world. Not the world, but our world. Many times when we want to explain something, a phenomenon, a variable, we have to look at research coming out of other parts of the world. To the north of us, European research, wherever.
We tend to lean out on Singapore as well.
And then but they have a very different reality.
And
their
different culture.
Environment is different. So we have to figure those things out. Then we can begin to plan for the actions that we must take to re-engineer people's behavior.
And I like that you say planning for it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not something that is obviously going to happen overnight.
No.
It's something that takes a while. Does it take 5 years? Does it take 10 years? Does it take a generation? Does it take
It's probably going to be 3 generations. It's probably going to be closer to 100 years. You see, remember, the environment shapes the people, and the environment gets passed from one generation to another. We are probably going to have to say, okay, we've lost some.
But you know, Richard, one of the things that's very interesting, you say it will take 100 years, right?
Maybe,
but
I don't know that.
We haven't even been independent for 100 years yet, right?
Yeah.
And we see a marked difference between how society used to be versus how it is.
Yes.
And that's just with the inclusion of technology.
Right.
We just went through different phases,
Yes.
right? So then it can happen in shorter periods of time. It just depends on what the triggering factors are.
It might happen in a shorter period of time. When I said 100 years, this is not a definitive time.
Of course.
I'm just saying it's going to take a long time, and it's not going to be a 5-year block. You know, this thing about we're going to plan for 5 years, and then in another 5 years we're going to change it because we didn't start it, or, you know, here's a good idea, but it's not good again because 5 years has passed. We can't operate like that. The nation is a going concern. The issues that we face are only getting worse. Look at our crime situation.
Well, of course.
Look at what has happened. For example, we just saw this past week the BIR saying we are owed some large amount, how many ever billions of dollars. And in one case, and I only say this because it's public, and in one case there's a businessman who has had a business for 21 years, and for 20 of those years he has not paid taxes. That's what the article said. Now, people owe taxes all the time, but that's not the issue here. The issue is, how is it that we have an institution that is supposed to do this work, not doing this work, right? For 20 years, they have the records, they know. For 20 years, what's going on? How is it that we allow, don't my word, we allow things like those to continue? Is it that we are choosing the wrong people? Is it that we are growing people wrongly? Is it that there are no consequences? You know, because you can't run a society properly if there are no consequences. And apparently there's some parts of the society you could just kind of get away with all kinds of things.
I mean, I want a quote from the old people and say long rope for maga goat, because you could get away with it, but for how long?
Yeah, but then here are a couple of questions. One, how many other people have gotten away and there's no rope attached to them? One. Two, if you have that, and at the same time you are implementing new taxes on the people, but the tax net has just all these holes, then is that right? If you put those two alongside each other, not being an economist myself, but we're levying new taxes. And all nations have taxes. Okay, I'm not fighting the idea of taxation, but we're levying all these new taxes, yet you have these individuals who egregiously, and I'm not even pointing to the individuals, I'm pointing to the people or the institutions who let them get by. That apparently is also part of our culture. You know?
But I mean, I feel like when you say let them get by, it sounds very much like, you know, well, yeah, you go ahead, you could pass, but you can't pass. You know what I mean? And I don't know that it's necessarily like that, because from what I understand about the situations that, especially when it comes to BIR office, they send you notifications, they give you the chance to make an arrangement with them in some cases, right? So for it to get to a number like that, of course, it would have been a process that had to happen, and for it to get in the public domain, of course, is a whole other situation. So how do we deal with, is it that we need to, I mean, we've been seeing the constitutional reform, or the conversations about constitutional reform. Is that the solution? Is it that we need to fix the systems and the way the systems are set up?
There are systems that need to be fixed, but I'm backing up. 20 years, Rawkus.
I mean, 20
years, Rawkus.
It's plenty.
Somebody not guarding the guards for this to be allowed.
That's the $1 million question. Who guarding the guards?
I am using direct language for this to be allowed to happen. And this is an example. This is just an example of what happens in Trinidad and Tobago. You remember the triumvirate? It's poor work ethic in the labor force, not me, Richard, saying so, bureaucracy and corruption. That's the triumvirate that makes it difficult to do business in Trinidad. And they feed on each other. So when you have a situation where 20 years has passed, okay, write me. If you had a credit union loan or a bank loan, and I write you once, wouldn't action be taken?
Right.
No, there's no one can convince me that this is just a happy coincidence. We've been trying for 20 years.
I mean, I imagine it wasn't the same person trying for 20 years.
Doesn't matter. We're not dealing with the individuals, we're dealing with the institutions, and we're dealing with accountability.
Right. Right.
Who is held accountable when you say there's this amount of money outstanding? And this is just one example, but who is held accountable for that? Who is now going in to say, let's look at this institution. Where are the weaknesses in this institution? How do we strengthen it? Because we have to. Because if this is happening, and this is just one.
So then is it not a positive sign that this is happening, which means that the institution is getting some sort of strengthening?
I guess we could turn it like that. I mean, I guess we could say at least something is happening. What I would like to see is, okay, great, do that work. How do we prevent it from happening again? How do we deal with the ones that are occurring now?
Right.
Because people and organizations and nations don't just change overnight.
Right.
So more than likely, the predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Quite likely, we have others that are being created right now. How do we prevent that?
Tell me, how do we stop the cycle?
So we have to go on and find out what's going on in there. Let's look at that process. What's the process for dealing with a business, and not a little business, but a big one that is well known, that is expanding in the Caribbean, and obviously has some cash to do that, right? Again, this is all public knowledge. How do we now, as an institution, deal with those matters? Who is responsible for what? What? Do those lines connect right to each other? Where does the ball fall? And when it falls, who catches? Who realizes, well, hold on a minute, something is wrong here. Is there somebody like that? Because I'll tell you what, if you have a credit card in Trinidad and Tobago in your name, and the bank says you could spend $5,000 and you try to spend $5,001, it ain't going through. Plus, if you're spending that money for the wrong reason, meaning it's not personal, and it starts to look a little funny, somebody gonna pick up the phone and call you, and say, we seeing this going on here. What's happening? This is a bank. That's a $5,000 transaction. Because there are systems and processes, and more importantly, people who are monitoring those.
Right, so then it's obviously different between the private and the public sector. So is it that we need to strengthen the support system for the public sector?
Before we go there, a quarter of our labor force works for the public sector.
Only? Is that 55%?
No. The number is about 24 to 26% depending on what you read. But it falls, but that's still a huge number.
Right.
So when we say that, we have to realize, well, hold on a minute. This is a major part of our labor force. Yeah. So we have to now say, okay, how do we do that in a public sector situation? Because any sneeze that the public sector has, the rest of us, we catch a cold. So that's something we have to investigate, and we have to be willing to do the hard work.
What is the suggested way? What is the recommended way that we investigate it? Because you're talking about 25% of the population.
We need will. None of this is a secret, Rawkus. I am not spilling any beans here. I am not a prophet. I'm saying we need the will to do it, the will to shake the trees, the will to go in and make people uncomfortable.
But is the will to be able to deal with the consequences
and be unpopular?
Because not just unpopular, be unemployed.
That's okay.
That's the reality of the situation.
You see, how else do you change a nation?
But how do you change a nation if you are unemployed? If you no longer have the impact that you have?
Who are we talking about?
If anybody inside the public sector decides they're going to shake the tree, right? They're going to say, all right, let me cause some things here and let me change the things that are going wrong. The ripple effect of that is going to be that there are repercussions.
So that means that we need to set up our constitution in a way that there is a body that is not subject to those kinds of concerns. Shouldn't we have a watchdog that doesn't answer to the dogs that are being watched?
But don't we supposed to have things? We're supposed to have a transparency institute. We're supposed
that's not a body in the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, it exists, but it doesn't have constitutional authority. Transparency International pretty much says, where do you fall in terms of perception? Fine, and that has a view. It gives us a view. I think we had 40% or something like that. So we're not doing so well, right? No surprise. But do we have a body, and are they doing the work that gets to look at what's going on in our nation and say, hold on a minute? Because you can't investigate yourself. How can you audit yourself?
Well, that's the thing, right? And that's where it gets very, very interesting.
But this is all behavioral. As a nation, this is behavioral, and this shows up at every level of the society. This kind of lack of accountability you can pass it on to one person to the other, and it's okay, and nobody feels the repercussions of it. This is.
No, people feel the repercussions.
No. Yes, you're right.
Not the people who making the
you
decisions,
are correct.
and that's the problem.
I stand corrected. You are absolutely right. The people who are making decisions and taking the actions, they don't feel. The rest of us, we pick up the tab, and our children and our children's children, because we keep writing these checks, but they have to be cashed at some point in time.
Richard, where's the hope?
There's hope.
Where?
But we have to be willing to do the hard work as a people. We have to be willing to be unpopular. And I dare say...
So you're saying we had a Gene Miles thing? That's what you're saying, Richard?
I'm not calling the name of Gene Miles in this particular situation, but we have to be willing.
I just giving you a real example of what happens.
I hear what you're saying.
Of what happens when you do the thing.
Let's try this. Let's start at this small level. You as a person, I as a person, what are we prepared to do and not do? I'm not willing to take certain kinds of actions. There's a process. No, I'm paying you outside of the process to do what I'm paying you to do in a logical and legal way. You must do your work.
Right.
Yes, I know it will take longer. Yes, I have to make 4 and 5 visits, but I'm not paying you. Let's start with frustrating that process. And anyone listening to me now probably knows exactly what I'm talking about, because that shows up all over our nation, unfortunately. Let's start there.
I think that's a great place to start. And here's what we'll do, Richard. We'll pause this conversation, because we definitely will be continuing it. And we'll give the nation that to think about and let them start there and see how it goes. Yeah?
I'm all right with that.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We take a quick break and come back with more in our morning show. Richard Solomon, Managing Director and Principal Consultant at Development Consulting Centre Ltd. We'll be right back.